Shalom Aleichem. I'll talk about today a little bit the musig of blech. Everyone knows when you go into every Yiddish house, they use a blech. They leave something on the fire for Shabbos. If we spoke about in the past, when do you need a blech, when you don't need a blech. But upon them, there's many cases that you need a blech and people use a blech. The question is, where does a blech fall out halacha? Where's the makor of blech? And everyone knows there's a sheet of Chaznish, and Chaznish held they can use a blech. So try to be masber a little bit what the machlokes is. It's a very complex Indian, really, to be young the safe uncontrolled Torah. We'll try to bring it down in a simple fashion. The Mechaber brings down the simulation on Gimel Siv Gimel like this: Amashkim eboiker, v'rosh edichat avshilot. Someone had a pot that was on the fire, and he saw that it was burning. So it's too hot. V'yor pen yaktiach yaisa, yochel lahaser laniach teri yishana. You take an empty pot and you put it on top of the fire. Take an empty pot, put the other pot, the cholent pot, the soup pot on top of that, and it's mutter. So it's mavur that it's mutter to make chazorah top of a gdeira konis. And obviously, if you make chazorah on such a thing, it would be mutter to be mashal chatchila in such a situation. Question is, what's the heter? So HaRav brings down from the Goyis Mordechai. The Goyis Mordechai says the Havale Kekiro Grufa Ketuma. Why is it Kira Grufa Ketuma? It means it's Ketuma. Why? Shakteros is Semis is Pia Kira. It's ice in the Pia Kira. It's covering. So what's the difference if you cover the Kira, the fire, with ashes, or you just put a pot on top of it? The Choy should be the same halach. And HaRav says based on that, he says the Choy he says his ovens on the top, they used to have like a maziva that was on top of the oven, and the fire was under that. So he says, according to that, you could make shea over there. Why? Because it's a built-in kotum in the oven. Then the HaRav says the marils mavur, they have to put something special there. And he says, vice it's not enough to make kotum. There has to be a hecker. And since this is built in, that this is something they can say though, that wouldn't be enough. What comes out from the HaRav is that HaRav understood pshat in this halach and Shulchan Aruch based on the Goyis Mordechai that when you cover a fire, it's considered like kotum. And the HaRav so weit wants to say that if you have a built-in maziva top of a stove top, that would be good. And he says maybe you need a hecker, but when you put a pot there, for shtetzel, you have a hecker there, may be more. That's what the HaRav says. The Mishabura brings down a Sifkon Pei Aleph. He brings down this HaRav. Basically verbatim what the HaRav says. So like that, our blech is exactly the same halacha. What should our blech be different than putting this pot on top of the fire? Point is, even though you're not smothering the fire like you're doing with Afer on top of the Eish, but the Matzia says you're covering the fire. It should be good. Then we should look into Kaf HaChaim. Kaf HaChaim is in Sifkon Yud Aleph. After he brings the HaRav, he says, Lafidze. They leave like a pot or kettle with coffee al eish, and nos the chatichas bas al eish, ben yishem mechasek al eish, but also clear kaval is the chatichas mut lahas the kaval Shabbos ashot b'sham, because that's considered a blech. Blech is considered like kotu. The Chazanish brings this maril, this mogen from, and he says, I don't understand how you can say that this is considered gar for kotu. He says in Vur, in Rashi and the Torah, that al-gaba, talks about gaba, if you have something that's the kisi on the gdeira, that's called agaba, it's considered on top of the kira. It's not considered kotum. So he says, what's this different than what's involved in the Torah and Rashi, that's considered mamash on top of the fire, even though there's something covering it, that's not enough. So Elamai, you want to tell me it's different because he put something special. So he says, what the HaRav says something special means they have something that's kotum. Now, it's not enough that it's kotum, but no reason for that there has to be a hecker. But if you just have a hecker without doing the olive base of kotum, how does that can help? So he says, Barashi told us before that when you're covering the fire with the kisui of the kira, that's considered you put on top of the fire itself. So maybe it's portion that heck is not going to help. So that he disagrees that this would not be nichlal in the heter of kotum. We'll see soon exactly what is the machlokes. We have a mechaber here. The mechaber says that you could put a Kedera Konos on top of fire, and that would be mutter to make chazorah. So the Chazon Ish, it's a whole new heter. The heter over here is, since it's a shinui that's in the Bishrakach, and it's a mayit the Chaim Harbro, therefore it'll be nichlal in the heter of smicha. Look, the Gemara, there's the heter of smicha. Smicha, in certain cases, will be mutter even chazorah. So he says, since this is a mayit the Chaim Harbro, and it's in the Bishrakach, we look at it like it's smicha. But to be matter mitzad chotum, about is something just covering the fire that cannot be considered chotum, and the heter is only because of smicha. And based on that, the Chazon Ish continues. This is the Chazon Ish, similar with both Sifkon and Tess. And he continues in Sifkon Yinalav, he says that al pizeh shiyo hanog bartzenu shepsius eish lamata. You have the fire on the bottom. This sivseh agdero lamayla al papu. The eish takshu legdero didiki kirshe the grufa. He says if you put it on top of the burn, obviously it's a kira that's in a grufa. Even if you're going to put what we call a blech on top of the fire, and you're going to put the day on top of that, it's still not going to help because that's considered, like he says, agabe hakira. So he's before in the Torah and Rashi that if you put something on the kisui of the kira, that's considered agabe kira. You want to tell me, okay, fine, let it not be considered keduma, but there is a mechaber of gimel. The mechaber of gimel says that you put a kedera konis, it's going to work. So no, kedera konis, the food is like he says because it's been mayit achoyim harba and it's in the bishop of Katz. Mashing over here, you don't have it. So the kitzur, what comes out from the Chazon Ish is that he says there's really two nekudas in the Chazon Ish, and it's very important to remember these two nekudas. I'm going to mass deliver what the machlekes is. But the nekuda number one is he says that you can't say that the heter that's going on in Shulchan Aruch is a heter because it's considered a kafir. I mean, just like when you cover the fire with ashes, like you smother the ash a little bit, that's considered ketuma. Or then, if you cover the fire with a kedera, is considered that way, like the simple reading the Mother of Rome. So you can't say that way because Mufurish and Rashi in the Torah, that something that you put on top of a kisui of a kira, that is considered like gabe a kira, is considered kira shein gruf. That's point number one. You're going to tell me here you put something bezonda, so it's a hecker. So the hecker is not a hecker by itself. Hecker is only the noisif that he made a katum. You have a hecker, but here you don't even have a mitzias of a katum. That's the hasaga number one. What is prat the mechaber? So he says the hecker mechaber is because the Bible is like smicha, since it's the mayit achoyim harba, and because it's roch, and it's the bishop cast is considered smicha, which obviously our blech doesn't have. So he's saying 2 points of Chazon Ish. Point number one is that the case of mechaber cannot have a heter of katum. Point number two, that has a new heter of smicha, and blech obviously doesn't have katum because it's even this kedera is not considered katum. And a blech doesn't have this nekuda of smicha because blech doesn't have the milo that it's in the bishop of and it's not my achoyim harba like the Chazon Ish holds in it. So based on this, the Chazon Ish holds that this that people are annoyed to use what we call a blech is garnished and it doesn't change the status of the kedera. It's still considered a kedera. That's agabe eish. That's gorov. That's in the group of the ketum. Now, like the Chazon Ish, there isn't an eight. So what you can do is you can make Chazon Ish blech. Chazon Ish blech is basically making a pot. You take a pot, but it's not the pot. It makes a blech. It looks like a big pot. It has a huge, like the yeshivas have like big chalon pots with a cover on top of it, but it's empty. So you could put something in it also, and you put that on top of the fire. So it looks like a kedera rekonis, and that would have the heter, but not mitzad koto. That heter would be mitzad considered smicha. You look at Archas Rabbeinu, Chelik Aleph, Beis brings down Morana Chazon Ish, Amali, she'ez me'etzel pakas, someone that makes kelim tas pach imasgeres sorah shetzurosek ei mechasa zadiri kekdero ta'amed beis Shabbos apach machalal agabe eish pakas v'yidiri kekdero agabe kekdero demoto lachs. Right. So according to the Chazon Ish, right. So according to Regalis was asking, yes, according to the Chazon Ish, the heter of Siv Gimel is not a heter like the simplest thing, like the HaRav says, because of it's considered kotum, it's like you smother it ish. No, here you're not smothering it ish. It's the heter is because it's considered smicha. And based on that, he says it has to be smicha. You don't have smichas only if it's rochakar and it's a ma'ita chaymarba, it would be nichal the heter smicha. And it's you do it a chaznish because he held so stark that our blechs are nothing. The chaznish was very makel. There's 2 points that you do it. The chaznish was very makel. Point number 1 is that we said last week that the Mishnah Lemaisa was machmir that that even a tafshel that was a special in the soil, as long as it's not cooked fully and you should make a blach. We spoke about why the minhag is not to, but that's what Mishnah says. And the Chaznish argues, says the machmir, but based on the Chaznish held that you can't make a blach, the blachs that are doing is nothing. So he said, that if it's special in the soil, it's good. Another kula, of the kula, which I'm a long bishul, speak about it, that there's the Mishnah Berurah sheet is that if you have a pot that's on the fire, not only you're not allowed to make a gosa, even if it's fully cooked, you're now eating moiti bekaf. It's also minabon. And the Chaznish holds that you could be making. Because the Chaznish sheet, they had a very big problem. Let's say someone had a pot on the fire and they want to take out some chalk but have to put it back on. So according to Mishnah Berurah, it's a very simple answer. What do? Take it off, hold it, and then you put it back on the fire, and you have a blech. The blech is considered gorva kotim. But according to Chaznish, it's not considered gorva kotim. So if it's not considered gorva kotim, now we have a big problem. How are you going to be able to put it back? So Chaznish was willing to be makel to allow you to do the tila b'kaf, that means to take out food with a kaf, to avoid the shiloh of putting it back on something that he did not consider a blech. Oh. So we're trying to remind exactly what is the machlokes, what's the other side. So Moshe has the truth of Chelik Aleph Siman Tzad Gimel. He does not bring, for what I remember, the Chaznish, but Toichat Vorim, he bavorns the Chaznish's problems. That the Chaznish asked, that how could you say that if there's a kisui, that means a kisui gdeira, you have a gdeira on top here, that would be considered like kotum. And the Chaznish says that it's not true. We have a Mefurish Rashi in the Torah that say that a kisui on top of a kira is considered putting it on top of the kira. On that, Moshe says that Bitzad Rashi Bechal is no kasha, because Rashi Shita we spoke about the first year is that it's a shia to dafka by Mitzad one of the Meisav Hevel, and the Yisor of Gorfa Kotum is to make it not Meisav Hevel. So many of the states of Rashi holds that if you're doing that just a kisui, that's not considered making it a matzav ain't a Meisav Hevel. But the halacha we don't have to do that. The halacha we just have to make a kotum. But the problem is the Torah that is masculine. The Torah l'chayra is going halacha that she is in the wizard. So then how could the Magen Avraham bring from the Goyis Mordechai that he put a pot that's considered kotum? Why is it different when the Torah said that you put something on the kisui of the kira, that's considered putting it on top of the kira? And that Moshe says that no, it's cholak, because even though you're right, a kisui of a kira maybe would be considered kotum, but the problem is you're missing a hecker. Why are you missing a hecker? Because people cook that way. People cook that way with a cover. Why would they cook with a cover? Because they're afraid that there's a big fire there, and they're afraid that if they're gonna cook without a cover, the tafshel is gonna burn. Some of felt in hecker. I mean, avada in Hilchos ketuma, avada is considered ketuma, but it's missing in the tanai of hecker. Because Zokra Moshe by a blech, avada is not missing a hecker. Because if anyone is afraid that the tafshel is gonna burn, and because of that, he wants to make the neish, the normal thing what you do is you make the fire lower. Those days they didn't have the option. Those days they had a fire, there was coals there. So what did you do if you don't want the food to burn? So you did something to match it between you and the fire. You put a cover and you cook like that. So it's a normal way. You cook either if you want it very hot, cook without the fire, without the cover on. And if it was very hot and you're afraid that the towel is going to burn, so you cover the fire so it shouldn't get so hot. So both of the ways was a normal way of cooking. But today, a simple way is you lower the knob and you hide the knob, and there's no one that during the week wants to cook something and it shouldn't be so hot that he would use a blech. So you have a hecker, so you have ketuma and you have a hecker. Chazish says that no, Shulchan Aruch is only talking about a chetim, so there was Kedei Rekonis. And Kedei Rekonis is a ma'id d'choin harba, And that's not the official. So how do you know anything more than that? For that, Bemes, the Shulchan HaRav, according to Zachrin, you look that that's designed the story of the Goyis Mordechai when you put the Kedera in the Kedera Konos. Not like the simple chat is the Kedera Konos upside down and you're putting it on the top of Kedera Konos. He says you're putting it inside. So if that's the case, I'm saying everyone agrees with it. But if you say that that's the case, it comes out that it's mamish like the case of a blech. It's mamish like the case of the Torah and Rashi, that is mamish like a cover on top of the fire, the kisui of the kira, and it's before it works. Why is it different from the Torah that says it doesn't work and here it works? The Torah says that over there there's no hecker and here there's a hecker. Now, remember, like we said, the lotion of the Goyis Mordechai, and the Mavar brings it down, is Ketuma. Ketuma doesn't sound like Smicha the way the Chazon learns. So Bemes, the Chazon himself was married this that Takas not so much away, and there's a Truman Shevet Levi, Chelik Aleph Simat Tzadi Aleph, he brings a letter that the Chazon wrote to him, and it seems to be from the letter that the Chazon is masking to him that the Chayr from the Goyis Mordechai, the Mavar brings down is Taka Mashma, that there would be a Heter Ketuma there, but he says Taka Enecham masking, but he also says still from Rashi the Tumah one. Now like it, mainly he wasn't willing to be made. Upon him, let's be masakim what we have till now, and then we'll try to be masba a little bit the thief guys in the Oimik and Machaikis. So we have here again a machaber, the paskas that if you put an empty pot up on the fire and you put a thing on top of that, that's mutter. The simple understanding is it's mutter because it's considered like cotton is considered you covering the fire. Chazir says we have Rashi in the Torah that's before that you put something on top of the cover of the kiro. That's not considered cotton. It's not good. So how does it stem? It must be that's a new heter in Shulchan Aruch here that smicha and blech doesn't happen. But we said from Moshe, Moshe says no. Avada really when you're covering the fire, that's considered cotton. The Torah that's before that you put something on top of the kisui of the kira, that's not considered. That's not good. He says over there's no hecker. Why would if someone cook with that? Push it because it's very very hot, and he's afraid the food's going to burn. So he cooks on top of the kisui. There's one way to cook with the kisui and one way to cook without the kisui. I'm showing you a blech. No normal person normally cooks with a blech. They just slow with a fire. Somebody that's considered heck. So upon that's what comes out. That's the shayrish machik is. Do we have a makar from Sif Gimel to the blech? The Chazon holds that Sif Gimel is a special heter of smicha, and that's only when it's b'mayit the harba, and there's a big chilik beineim. It's very far from the eish, and it's not that bishul gach, and according to Ramesha and the Pashtus and Magen Avram and others, and that seems to be the Minan Goylam, is that the heter Shulchan Aruch is of its cotton. So I just want to to maybe a little bit more effort to understand the Oimik or Machaikis. At first, one point, Ramesha says that our blechs is not derech bishul b'kach. The Chazon says that no, our blech that's derech bishul b'kach. He says that only in the case of Shulchan Aruch, if they recall this, then that's considered derech bishul b'kach. So that includes the machaikis. What's the machaikis? He holds derech bishul b'kach. Chazon holds you needed more of a derech bishul b'kach. Like totally no one cooks that way. Obviously, it's true. People would cook more on a blech than cooking on an empty pot. But the question is, what's the shayrish machaikis? So about if this machaikis is pasha, is a machaikis l'shita sayu, and what the shayrish should have had to the mechaber. That means according to the Ramesha, that the head of the mechaber is because it's cotton. The vase, what you're missing is hecker, and that's the pshat by the Torah is not makel to put it on top of the kisui of the kiro, even though it's mitzvah cotton, but you're missing a hecker. So that kol kamo, that it's a little bit ein derech bishul b'kach. Now we get back. Yeah, but according to the Chazon Ish, this is not considered cotton. There's no heter cotton. The heter is because it's considered smicha. Smicha means that it's all new heter, not because of cotton. Smicha means we don't see the connection b'chlal to the ish. It's bite from the ish. So that about it has to be like Chazon Ish says, it's not derech bishul b'kach, and it's mayit al har. So that versteht sich by blech yidron. Oh, but I want to get to a different account. What is the kishkis of machaikis the Chazon Ish and we'll call it Ramesha? That means the Chazon Ish holds that a blech or the Shulchan Aruch Kedera Konos can only be perceived as smicha, and you can't call that cotton. And the Moshe says that about it could be called cut. Chazish is a kasha from the Torah. Moshe says just missing a hector. But the Chazish holds no. It's not only a question of missing hector. You're missing the olive base of Ktum. I just want to to a little bit what the Kishkas and Machlekes is. Tobi is totally on the Shaila. What is the Yisod hector of Gorfa Kotten? Mentioned once that maybe Machlekes is the Rash, but the Balabon is the Kuda. But the Shorish Machlekes is what's the hector of Gorfa Kotten? What do we have to do? Is it only by if you made a pool in the Etzem Eish, the Mayit the Chaim? You have to be Mayit the Etzem Eish. You have to knock out part of Eish. Or it's enough that you have a hecker and a hesach hadas to show that I don't care so much about Eish. If you hold, it has to be to do a pull-up in Bimamayit, the Eish itself. That's the sort of what Cotton does, Mayit the Eish itself. So Chadish holds that when you have a Kisu Gedera, you're not Bimayit the Eish itself. All you're doing is you're making it that the Eish is not coming to the pot. Okay, so you might have a heter smicha, but that can't be nichla on the heter of Gorfa Cotton. And that's the sort of the Torah, Kisui Kedera, Kisui Kira. None of these things work. It's not missing hecker. It's not considered cotton. Ashenkin, Ramosha, Udime, and the Veld goes, Tavaket. The Nakuda of Gorva Cotton is that you have to make it that showing that I'm doing a pull-up, that buys that I'm a seer dash from the Ish. So obviously you have to hecker to devise that. But that's the Yisod. So as long as the mice of the Metzias is, I'm showing that I'm a seer dash from the Ish, because I'm showing I don't care so much about the fire. Either by smothering the fire by putting ashes on it, or by putting something between the pot and the fire, mashal, the kisui of the kira, or putting the food on top of a kedera. With that, I'm showing that I don't care so much for the fire, and mela, that would be considered kata. Now for us, obviously, in the case of the Torah, by a kisui of the kira, it's not going to work, because over there you're missing the hecker. What's the raya that I'm doing it because I'm a seich das in the age? Maybe it's just too hot and I want the food to burn. So that states why it's not going to work. That means you have the mitzias of what could be considered katum, but you don't have the hecker what you need in katum. Like kisui pak that we have out left, or the case of Shulchan Aruch of kedera, that about you would have it and it would work. Mashayim the shows that katum has to be that you do a kapula to ma'it the chayim aish etzer. And maybe in all these cases, if you don't have it, then the only heter would be because it would be considered smicha. So the kids will just make a secret. Mamash Kitzur comes out that we have Sif Gimel here. That the simple reading of Sif Gimel is that you put a pot on the fire and you put a pot on top of that. You can make shia, you can make chazorah. That would be considered kot. That's the Magen Avraham brings from the Goyis Mordechai. The Chaznish, and according to that, the HaRav would have the same halacha. Chaznish says that no, he has a mefurish Torah that says that you put something on top of the kissing on of the fire, that is not considered cotton. It doesn't say it's not cotton, just mefurish that it's not good. So he understood that because cotton, like we're saying, it has to be that you did something in the etzem eish. You might the etzem eish. He not might something in the etzem eish, and say that's why blood is not going to work. If it's going to work over here, it's only going to work mitzad smicha, and that's the head of Shulchan Aruch. And then he says, I blech should work at smicha. Because there's no blech can't work at smicha. The smicha is only when it's a ma'it achim haba ve'in derech bishul kach harba, because you have to two away that it's considered like smicha. Ashenke by a blech, you don't have that because more people cook that. But the Moshe with the email hold no, that the head of the Shulchan Aruch is like the pastures of the Magen Avraham, the Goyis Mordechai. The head is because it's considered cotton. I don't have to smother etzem eish as long as the mice I do something that is making it that the effects of the fire is not affecting the pot so much, and I'm a gal das, but I don't want so much heat. That's enough. If you put something on top of the kisui of the kir, doesn't work. Teretz is partial. Over there you're missing the hecker. Why am I missing the hecker? Because maybe I'm just putting it that way because I'm afraid the food's going to get burnt. Mashenkin here, if I want the food not to get burnt, I have a simple answer. Lower the fire. So by a blech, I have the hecker. So Melo, that's the machlokes between Chaznish and Ramosha, and Bnei Brak is definitely Yiddim Stam Machmer on the Chaznish, but the Amad Debar is to go like Ramosha, and it's before that's the pashtus from the Shabura and the Magen Avraham, that about the way the meaning is the way we use blechs, is about the good. I just want to side note that so we're talking about only when it's not full kabayich ben soy. Once kabayich ben soy, the whole blech like we spoke about last week, it's just only a chumrah about. But even if it was a kabayich ben soy, the ikar halacha is that you could use a blech, and that's the minagoylum, and that's where Moshe went, and there's the kisser of Hank also writes that way, and that's the Amad Dabar. But like I said, in Bnei from the basement, Joshua and Chazonish, don't use a blech. If they would use something, they would only use something that would be the form of an empty pot, a huge empty pot, and make like a blech looks like something like that. But that's only until it's Kamachim and Soy. Once Kamachim and Soy, Nevada has a shell, the bigger than you can. Oh. I want to talk about another nakud. In the Metzias of what was Bisman Chazal, not only Bisman Chazal, what was Bisman Shulchan Aruch was a little bit different than what we have today. Let's talk about Shulchan Aruch. What was the case? You had a kira and you had a fire day. So what do you have to do? Let's talk about what we just spoke about. Chotum. Chotum is you cover the fire. Or gorif would be you would take out the coals. Or the chotum of the Gemara is that you put ash on top of it. Today the mitzvah is a little bit different. Today, in those days, let's say someone why would Chazal raise a shear? Because someone's going to come to Mechata. And what's the person going to Mechata? He's going to stroke the coals. Today, if someone wants to hide the fire, what does he do? He strokes the fire. That's what we do. You turn the knob high. So the question is, where is the chiyuv to make gorfa kotum? Is the chiyuv to make gorfa kotum on the mokam eish, just like the ban Chazal? That's what Chazal will machayiv. That with that you make al das. They don't want so much eish. Or the chiyuv gorfa kotum is on the knob, which that's the mokam chit. Kids do we? The ban Chazal, the mokam chitui was in the mokam eish. Today, the mokam eish is one thing, and the mokam chit is somewhere else. The question is, where do you have to put the gorfa kotum today? It's a big nafkamina. When you make a blech, you have to cover the fire, or have to cover the knobs. Maybe you have to cover both. Maybe just the knobs. So there's a big machekes in the Gdei HaPoskim. And the Shaul is like we're saying, what's the nakuda? Today we're a little bit different than was Bisman Chazal. Bisman Chazal, the tzias was, the chitui was b'mokam eish, and now you have to cover that. Today, the chitui is in the knobs, and the mokam eish is somewhere else. The question is, where's the chal the din of gorfa kotum? So, Rav Shlomo Zalman in his Tshuva, in Mara Shabbos, and in Archa Shabbos, being down from Yashuv, they both held that the Iker is exactly the way as Bisman Chazal. They have to cover the Ish. That's the Iker din of gorfa kotum, which means the blech has to cover the fire. As always, bewusst, M'shem of Yankiv, the Sal that he also held that way, that the blech has to cover the fire. Moshe in Truas says also that the Ikar halacha is about it has to cover the fire. But he says you should l'chatchila since l'maisa. The Zman Chazal, the mokam eish was the mokam achitus, and today also l'chatchila you should cover the knobs. But he's master the Ikar is the covering the fire. Midach Yisrael, the Sheir Levi holds that the Ikar halacha is that you have to cover the knobs. That's the Ikar halacha. But he holds also, and he holds you should cover both, but it's more midvarav that he holds the Ikar is to cover the knobs. That means there's a mile to cover other things, but the Ikar is to cover the knobs. And there's also the Yedua, Baron held very stark that the Ikar halacha will speak about even my Chazori on that. That needs a beer, which we get the Chazor will talk about it. But the bottom of the Geir Shir, Baron held the Ikar is you have to cover the knobs. That doesn't mean that he held there's no mile in covering it, but the nafkamina of this shmuz is, which I will speak about when we get to the more practical applications, is an oven. By an oven, when you talk about the stove top, it's very simple. You can cover the fire, you put a blech, you can cover the knobs, you put silver foil on, some blechs have a pot that goes down, you have a hot plate, a lot of things, most things you can cover both. The thing that you can't cover both is when you have something in the oven. You have something in the oven, you could cover the knobs, cover the dials, but you can't cover the dash. Speak about why you can't. Maybe just put silver in the bottom. We'll speak about it why you can't do it. But that's halacha, that's undernomen that you can't do that. So it's a big nafkamina. Could you be masha something in oven? According to most poskim that hold the ikadin gorfa kotum has to be the mokam eish. So by a tara comes out, you can make it gorfa kotum. Mashegre behold, like a baron of email that the Ikad didn't go for cotton trace in the Kaftar. So it comes out, you'll be able to do it even today. Like upon what comes out is that the Ikad Locha Pashtus is that you have to cover fire. Someone that wants to be machmer and cover the knobs, that is a very nice thing to do. But I just want to mention, like we said last week, once something is Kamaichem in the soy, really don't have to cover, there's nothing going for cotton. Obviously, you want to make chazorah, and even if it's fully cooked, it's not fully cooked, it's a bishul. But so to go on that in Moisef to cover the knobs, the person doesn't have. Someone wants to, about the. You have to know what ikaloch is. The ikaloch is that you have to cover the fire. If something is not fully cooked, it's only, let's say, kamaichem n'shoy. You have to cover the fire. And look at chilo, you should cover the knobs. So let's say a blech, and goes down to cover the knobs, or you cover with something else. That would be good. I want to end off one more nakuda. I think it's a choshva nakuda. A lot of times people ask the Shaul, are you allowed to make a blech on Shabbos? What's a practical case? Someone has a pot of Shaul, he left it on the fire. Called up his Rav. His Rav says, as long as Kamaichem and Soy, it's fine. Left it on the fire. That was the Metzias. Now, he realizes Shabbos morning, it's very, very hot. And he's afraid that it's going to burn. So what does he want to do? Simple answer. You put a blech. Mela is not going to get so hot, especially let him make a blech on Shabbos. So that's a Metzias of making a blech on Shabbos. And we just learned. Reish Nun Gimel, Sif Gimel. It says over there in Mechaber, the Mamish is great. Someone had a pot on the fire, and he sees that's going to burn. So what does he do? He takes another pot, empty pot, turns it upside down, and puts the day on top of it. And that's considered like kotel. So you see, it's clear there's no problem of making a blech on Shabbos. Now, there's two nakudas. I mean, that's a masiyas blech. I'm not sure what the issue would be, but it seems to me people have a shaila that maybe you can make a blech that has to be before Shabbos. That doesn't have to be before Shabbos. As long as the Maisa, again, let's say someone had a cholent and he wants to take the cholent, let's say on a hot plate, and someone wants to take some cholent Friday night. They didn't make the blech. Fine. They can make a blech on Shabbos. There's no issue with it. But there's two issues they have to deal with. One issue, Mr. Bur and Sifkot Ayin Test says that this is only talking about on an old blech, an old keder. What Shaul is talking about a keder. He says a new keder. He says a problem. Avachadosha also the mislabin. I they choy benasa kli gemor they say. Ubekder shalom shvakan. Digmat ikuna vasiyasa v'tam shoyt ev sheish lok mokamatcha. That means what the Mishnah means is that's mavur in Siman Tov Kuf Beis Siv Dalet Hilchos Yomtiv. That keder chadosha in those days, especially the Metzias, was that it didn't get fully strengthened until the first time you put on the fire, and the ish made that chalois tick into it. Amel is the shail of tikkamona, and it's also to do it. But he says today that it's quite nigbat tikuna vasiyason. But now it's every shok mokamatchak. I'm not sure if today it even applies only mokamatchak, because today the Metzias says there's no real ishtanis. Before you cook it, we have to cook it. Oh. That's point number one. Point number two is that the Chazon Ish is married. Chazon Ish says the Shulchan Aruch is talking about a k'deira shel cheres. But a matchis, he says he has a new problem. Why? Because Rambam says in Perek Lachapol, Hacham is a matchis, ad shenasa gecheles, how is him a vashel? You take a piece of metal until it comes to gecheles. The Mechaber says that the Rambam says that applies like a vashel. So the Chazon Ish, after Medayla nasa gecheles near dos. So Chazon Ish has a new problem because the matchis are coming to gecheles. Moshe is true about this. And Moshe says that you're right. If you have a massive fire, and the blech would come into gecheles, good. But ours, it's a small fire. It's not going to come to gecheles. A lot of there's no problem. He says, you see, over the whole Shabbos, that can come to gecheles. Moshe says about it, there's no problem, and also Shem Zalman says the same thing about it, there's no problem. So it's Mishabur says one time to make sure that it's not chadosh. It doesn't say like Chazon Ish says that the Shulchan Aruch is only talking about a kli cheres, not a kli matchus. So Chazon Ish, you see clear, it's not an argument. The Messias is not coming kechel shematzus in the case of Shulchan Aruch, but he says the Lashon Chazon Ish is ba'af imadayin, af madayin. Like Nazir Chel is near dos. Why is it also? If it's not going to come to Gechalas, what the Chaznish means as Chati Shir. It's a shtick of the Chiddush. That's called Chati Shir. Chati Shir, what we find is let's say you eat a half a share. But here, it's half the malacha. The malacha has to get, you want to talk about this, a bishul. Bishul has to be a shaker gregus. You get a half of gregus, that's called chatzi share. But here, you don't have the whole malacha. What would be the malacha if, let's say, something that be considered cooked, it has to be cooked, kamaychim in the soy. Till then, it's not considered cooked. Whenever you have to cook something, yatsa lettuce, a little more than yatsa lettuce, but it's not kamaychim in the soy. Is that any issue? So I would say that's called the chatzi share. Be'echos, not Katz. Chatzi be'echos, pasha is not a problem. Maybe the emes is that it's not the place to go into, but emes is a big machayik. It's like a place most halacha when you have chatzi share. Be'echos, not Katz. The Chaznish shita is, the Chaznish says a simon nun tzid contest that he says lahedjit. If someone cooks something from yatz lettuce boy further on the way to kamaychim in the soy, even though it does not get kamaychim in the soy, it's issa deraisa of chatzi share. Really, stopping with that, there's a problem chatzi shir, which stems with Chaznish shita. There was a chatzi shir, even the echos not only becomes a problem. It's interesting. In Mincha Shloimo, the Chelik Aleph Siman Yud Aleph from Nagoa said he brings over there the matik a letter that he wrote to Chaznish, Mamash Gabi this Nakuda, and he said, spoke about the shadow with the blood. Chaznish was machman. He says, I don't understand. Ought you're going to tell me that if someone's going to cook something and it doesn't come to Maichim in the soy, it's going to be, you can very this the rice that's chatzi shir. That means about also be above. But are you going to tell me it's me also chatzi shir? So who are they by blech? Since it doesn't come to Kachel Shematras, even though technically, if you would cook it very, very long, maybe it would be Eish Gedayla, it's considered chatzi shir, be echos and not pakam, so it wouldn't be a problem. But Haisa, for the Teretzes, the Chaznish Taka, Paskins, in Simon Nunzit contest, they take a Paskins that chatzi shir be'echos could be a problem, and he says that if you cook something from yatz lettuce till not kamaychim in the soy, even a little bit further, it's a shiloh of issa deraisa of chatzi shir. Upon him, what comes out is the Chaznish holds that there could be two issues of putting a blech on Shabbos. Just the mitzvah of putting a blech, there's no problem, but there's one issue mitzad making the kli. If it's chadosha, if it will be a new blech, that we said today the mitzvah is the way it's done, there wouldn't be a problem. There's another issue if since the blech is matchis, so the Chaznish holds the problem of chatzi shir be'echos because it's coming a little bit mavushal, and Moshe and everyone else seems to them on that about it, there wouldn't be a problem of chatzi shir be'echos, and it wouldn't be a problem. So about it, the ikaloch is that it's mutter. If someone wants to make maybe says to me true as someone maybe sure they want to be machmir, maybe they welcome to machmir to fresh with the Chaznish, but the Chaznish sheet is definitely a chumrah, and the amad bar is on this ma'asim b'chayoyim. People put blechs on the fire even on Shabbos, and the minhag is not to be fresh for the sheet of Chaznish.